And what's up, everybody, and welcome to Quickfire Comic Talk, Episode 5. Today, I'm really excited because we're going to be doing our first ever SpoilerCast. I am one of your hosts, Garrett Anderson, and with me today is a very special guest and a person who I hope is going to be on the Quickfire Comic Talk a lot more, Mr. Mark Sabag. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this book.
All right, and yeah, so we're going to be talking about High Crimes, a book which I picked up at my local comic book shop down the street, and it turned out they had a book club going on at the time, and I decided to sign up for that, and in doing so, I read it, I loved it, I happened to post something about it. Mark here saw my post, and he went out and read it too, and we both kind of, have some really deep thoughts on that, so we're going to be spoiling the crap out of this today. So just so you guys know, before we start talking, we are probably going to be talking about every little bit of detail. So this is more for the people who have read the book or for people who aren't planning on reading the book but want us to hear about it anyway, which I think is kind of weird. I don't know why you want to do that, but you have been warned. Full spoilers are going to be flushing out here. So the artist is Christopher Sebela, and the artist is Abraham Mustafa. Both of which I was kind of unfamiliar with. So what was your first impressions about the book, Mark? How did you feel like going into it? Did you know anything about these people or the story at all?
No, I didn't know of either the writer or the artist from anything before. You recommended it, and I sort of immediately do the thing I always do when a book's recommended to me. I hit up Google and I looked at samples of some of the panels to sort of see if it rubs me the right away from the art style. Usually I search issue 1, usually. The title of the book, High Crimes, issue 1, so I don't get a spoiler on Google Images. But sure. I just try to grab a panel or two that I can look at. Do I like the art style? And if I like the art style and if I like the dialogue, the tone of the dialogue, you can tell a lot from a little quick sample. Is it written in a way that you identify with? Right away, I liked the way it was written. And the art, it's got a nice clean style. It's got a very precise style to it, which I like. From panel to panel, there's a lot of consistency in the art. And that always jumps out to me. It's like something like what you get with Wicked and the Divine, the crispness, the clarity in the artwork, that just gives it that pop. So right away, that interested me, because even just based on the artwork alone, that can sell me on a book. And if the story really kind of meets the potential, all the better. So right away after you recommended it to me, I was curious. I hadn't, and I talked about it recently at a local comic shop, and the people who run the store, they're really knowledgeable. They hadn't heard of the book. I was surprised. I recommended it to them as well. Yeah. So it is sort of a lesser known title, at least around here. I'm based in Montreal. But and on the internet, I have noticed that some of the reviews are a little up and down. So, but your recommendation, you gave it a glowing review, and I figured I'd give it a try based on that, and so I picked it up. And would you like me to go a little bit further into my initial impressions, or you want to sort of break it down?
Before we get to the initial impressions, let's just tell everybody basically what the overall plot and the premise is. Give them the kind of breakdown. So there is this flawed ex-snowboarder who was in the Olympics, and her name is Suzanne. Everybody calls her Zan for short, and she's incredibly human. She had a really big talent. She was really skilled, but she gets kicked out of the Olympics because of her drug and alcohol use. And so this is a very human main character, somebody who a lot of people I'm sure can probably relate to in some kind of ways. We've all had our failures and up and down in life. But anyway, she gets kicked out of the Olympics, right? She decides, because she's been in high altitudes her whole life, so I get the feeling that her lungs have been able to acclimate to this higher thin air. So she decides to take up a job as a Sherpa, right, to give these thrill seekers and these tourists these guides up to Mount Everest. And unfortunately, I guess that doesn't make a lot of money. You don't get paid very much to do that. And so she kind of gets in cahoots with this other gentleman, and they basically start to become high-end grave robbers. So basically what they're doing is they're leading these people up there, and if they die, they don't report the death. And they end up taking the right hand of the casualty, the person who dies, along with all their possessions. When they get back down from the mountain, they end up contacting the next of kin and basically saying, hey, we can bring your, loved one's remains back to you at a price. Well, they do this with the wrong person, and it turns out they end up finding a dead man and taking the hand of a guy who was an undercover agent, if you will, a kind of garbage man of sorts, a guy who you really don't want to fuck with. This guy did terrible things for a terrible, terrible agency. And right when they scan the fingerprints to find out who he is, it kind of sets off an alarm on the internet or however it works. And it turns out that that agency wanted that man alive, and they were willing to kill whoever and go do whatever to find this guy. And so it ends up being a kind of chase up Mount Everest. So that's your main plot of the story. And like when I was told that main plot, I was like, holy shit. I mean, I don't know about you, Mark, but that's pretty fucking action-packed. I mean, when you start thinking about, holy cow, this is a high-altitude murder mystery thriller. So why don't you get into your impressions of it? Like, I mean, just starting it off and everything.
Yeah, well, I'll just reflect a little bit on what you said just then, because, it's based on a lot of sort of real-world subjects that are interesting in and of themselves. One is the presence of dead bodies on Everest.
Right.
Mount Everest is actually fairly coated toward the top, but with plenty of dead bodies, because hikers often die, and it's very, very difficult to bring them down and super risky. So I believe that right now there's somewhere in the order of 100 people up there they haven't been able to bring down. Yeah, that's a real thing. So
real fact,
it's a real fact, and that happens in this book. I mean, it relates to the reality of what would a family pay to have their loved one returned to them? Because a lot of the people who scale Everest are wealthy to begin with, so they have wealthy family members, and so that's what they're exploiting through this service is based on a real world problem. So right away that kind of hooked me, because I had recently heard about the fact that there was so many dead bodies on Everest. So when I started getting into the plot of the story, I was like, wow, that connects directly to that that issue. The other thing is that scaling Everest or any high peak right away presents so many challenges without any of the intrigue or adventure that occurs in the story. So even in the real world, it's a pretty fascinating and adventurous pursuit. So I thought it was really interesting to put that right on the knife's edge. It's already one of the most dangerous things you can do. Let's make it 10 times more dangerous. So as far as the setting goes, I thought it was really unique, and I thought they treated it pretty respectfully, while at the same time giving us an adventure that was worth reading and that kept you excited. I thought initially, also to reflect a little bit on the character of Zan, I thought it was a very interesting character. As far as female protagonist is concerned, I really liked sort of murky nature of her character as far as her moral underpinnings were concerned. Because I think a lot of the times in a lot of the books that I've read that focus on a female protagonist, I feel a lot of the time they aren't given as much space to be flawed as a male protagonist is. A lot of male protagonists, you come away from the book thinking, I don't really know what I feel about that guy. Whereas female protagonists, they tend to be either really good or really bad. Whereas Zan is in this zone where she's extremely human. It's like you read something like Fear Agent and you walk away from that and you're like, is he, what kind of guy is he really, based on all of his exploits and how he chose to make money and the decisions that he made. That's a different book for another day. But I do find that a lot of male characters exist that way. And I really appreciated that. She has this great strength and this physical ability, but at the same time, her vulnerabilities aren't inherently female vulnerabilities, they're human vulnerabilities, which I liked a lot. Her relationship with the name is escaping me for the moment. The man she's working, Haskell. Her relationship with Haskell, they have that camaraderie and they have that friendship. There's hints of a father-daughter dynamic.
Yeah, father-like figure. Yeah, for sure.
There's also hints of I feel like they're kind of generations that sort of missed. Like if they had been the same age, maybe there would have been a romantic, but there never really was. I felt like that could be there in the sort of the undertone, but I didn't think they built their relationship on that, which I thought was a really strong thing to do. Their relationship was built on the fact they were partners, they trusted each other, they backed each other up, and they left it that way. They didn't have that, you know, moving toward the end of the narrative arc, they didn't have something where it turns out that she's in love with Haskell, or they didn't go there, you know? So I thought
they didn't need to.
They didn't need to, you know, and we'll get, I'll throw it back to you, but I think later on we'll return to a little of that when we look at the dual narrative and how that impacts the story as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I think you nailed the nail on the head there. I mean, going into it, I had a hard time myself personally kind of rooting for her. Is that weird? Like, I mean, like I felt bad. I felt bad for her, but at the same time I was kind of like, well, you're kind of a piece of shit a little bit, you know? I mean, like, I understand, like, she had to do it to make money, but, like, I think that's another thing about how well you can relate to the character. I myself have never had a really bad drug addiction or anything like that, so I didn't have that going on for me. I'm not a snowboarder, but I think I kind of leached onto these characters because of how human they were and where they kind of went to that story. I mean, they go some dark places when they're talking about this person's past, but interesting enough, beyond her, the dual narrative, which you were about to talk to, Sullivan Mars, he had just a creepy of a past, but just in a different kind of a way. Yeah. And I think that's another reason why I like this book, is because although they're telling the story of, you know, Suzanne and Haskell, they're simultaneously telling the story of Sullivan Mars. Now, Sullivan Mars is the guy who they find on the mountain, who they find out who had this deep, dark past, and that's why they're getting chased up Mount Everest, is because of this guy. This guy also had a dark past. He was a normal guy who basically got brainwashed into becoming this ultimate assassin for this completely dark agency, and they literally made him not be a man anymore. They took his like freedom and basically made him a super soldier. And so it's interesting when they're telling the story of Suzanne's dark past, but also kind of like going back and forth between Sullivan Mars's dark past as well. So what did you think about that? Like about how they were able to kind of like merge those stories together in a tree-like form?
Well, I thought it was interesting just from a general narrative perspective, because I thought it added a texture to the storytelling. Yeah. But I thought that there was a few other levels that it was working on which were particularly clever, which were that, you know, whenever you're following a sort of a narrative, a character story, there's always a certain sort of discrepancy, I suppose, between their interpretation of their own story and your interpretation of their story. You know, you're watching their story unfold, but if there's narration in the story, as there is in this one, you know, she'll say, this is why this is the way it is, and this is why this happened. But we also are forming our own opinion as an audience about whether or not we agree with her interpretation. Where I thought that the dual narrative became really fascinating is that Sullivan Mars, through his diary that she's reading as she's ascending to try to get to his body, basically,
which is so cool. I love that.
This chase, she's basically retracing his footsteps. I think it's worth mentioning at this point as well that even though she's serving as what you're referring to, like a climbing guide, essentially a Sherpa for rich tourists who are ascending the local mountains in the area of the Andes, she herself has never ascended to the absolute peak of Everest.
Right. So she's never been to the
throughout
top.
This story, Sullivan Mars's journey was to the absolute peak, and she all along has sort of been meaning to get there. It's her ultimate goal, but because it is so time consuming and so difficult, it takes a lot of training, preparation. And for her, it had been that thing she was sort of looking for as the golden experience. When she finally gets to the top, she thinks it's going to bring her some kind of resolution or clarity.
It's her rebirth.
And that's sort of what Sullivan Mars seemed to be looking for as well. He felt driven, and that's probably a good discussion to have maybe a little bit later toward, as we discuss like how the narrative progresses. But I do think that Sullivan Mars thought or was looking for something in that ascent to the peak. And I think that where the narrative becomes particularly interesting is that I feel like her her ascent to the top of Everest is informed to some degree by Sullivan Mars's ascent as she reads through his diary, and in turn we are reading through her diary as she's making the climb. So we become sort of the third participant in this chain of diaries, if you want. And I thought that was really interesting because I thought it put us in her shoes to some degree.
Yeah.
Because as she's reading a diary, we're reading a diary. So
yeah,
I felt
that's a trip.
Yeah, so it was sort of a trip because it brings you back and it has you reflect on how you're kind of playing the same role that both Mars and her are, but with your own personal narrative. It was sort of a reminder of that, I suppose. I thought that was an interesting technique, and I thought that, I'd seen some reviews that were a bit critical of the pacing of the story, and I think that's probably in part because of the Sullivan Mars diary entries. I think it slows the story a little bit. The Sullivan Mars stuff is kind of sober and sort of metered, because that's his personality. He's kind of cold. He's not emotional when he tells his story. He's very much like,
he's just a cold-blooded assassin.
Right. And I think that slowed the story for some people because the things which happen in Sullivan Mars's life, for the most part, aren't sort of impacting the immediate narrative. They're more about history, so people don't see it as action, even if there's action in the stories he's telling. Whereas I actually think they do something that's really good for the story. It reminds me a lot, and I think I'd be surprised if there wasn't some influence. It reminds me of a lot of the pirate story in Watchmen, the comic book, and how that affects how you interpret the events of Watchmen, even though it is sort of about something kind of aside from the main plot of Watchmen. Throughout reading Watchmen, the fact that you have those elements, it sort of flavors the story of Watchmen. And I thought the Sullivan Mars narrative does that for the book. And even though I can understand there is some criticism, I suppose, about the pacing, for me, it added a headiness and a sort of cerebral quality to the story that improved it. It improved it greatly, as a matter of fact.
I agree. I mean, there was only, like, when they would go back to Sullivan Mars's, history and telling about, places and time and the things he did and all the terrible crimes he committed, it would only be pages at a time. And it only really made him as a character more of a character. I mean, like, without those throwbacks into time, you wouldn't even really know what the big deal about Sullivan Mars even was. All you would know is that he was somebody of importance. But then when you start to see, like, holy cow, this guy was like the best of the best of his group, that these people are willing to do and kill anybody just to find out who he is amazing. I had one critique about that whole thing about Sullivan Mars, and I'll let you go ahead and comment on this too, is I wonder, what knowledge did he have? What was on those little rolls? Because it wasn't also necessarily Sullivan's body they wanted. It was the contents on his body. And she, at one point in time, she finds this one roll, right, that has negatives on it of photos of things. And there's a couple of pages where they show, like, human body things and a diagram of a bomb, but they never really get it. I don't know if they had to, but I was just curious as to, like, was this a plot for World War III? Was this like what it would have been cool for them to sum up what was on his person, you know? I don't know.
I know what you mean. I think the way they used that device was to some extent reminiscent of what you saw in Pulp Fiction. I think we can spoil that a little bit now.
You can spoil the shit out of Pulp Fiction.
That's a 20-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it yet...
best Samuel L. Jackson quote in history, too.
Sure. It's a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it to the point where you wouldn't enjoy it. But I will say this. You have a briefcase in that movie with a mystery object in it. They are trying to get the briefcase back. They open it, and you can see light reflecting on their faces when they open the briefcase, because something in it is generating or reflecting light. Something's mysteriously placed in this briefcase, but the viewer never sees what that object is.
Yeah, it's open to interpretation.
Right, and by not telling you, they empower your imagination to for every person, they think it's something which to them is most desirable. And so I think if they told you what it was, what information Sullivan Mars had, then your brain starts to deconstruct that information. Like, for example, you start to say, maybe someone should know this information. Maybe if Suzanne doesn't do something with it, that impacts her morally. Maybe you'd say, that information doesn't seem that controversial to me personally. What's the big deal? By having it mysterious, we assume it's the most important, amazing, secret knowledge. And I
Right.
think because it never actually directly impacts the plot, what's actually on those microfilm, I think that it's okay not to know what it is, but to assume it's something really special and that anyone would kill for. It's like he's got the keys, and then eventually, as we learn, Suzanne gains access to this information herself. She has that initial microfilm which was implanted in his hand. So when
Right.
Haskell cut off his hand, she found it in the hand when they were back at Haskell's place. And then eventually, by acquiring access to his actual body, the remaining microfilms are, retrievable. So
Right.
that gives the person who holds them great power, which is relevant eventually to the story and how it folds out, at the end.
How did you feel about Dorhe as a character? I think that's how you say his name. I'm sorry if I'm butchering it. It's like Dorge, and that is the other Sherpa who she kind of like convinces to help her along. And he almost seems like an older brother like figure. I mean, I was kind of, I didn't know what was going to happen there, and I kind of wish that he had kind of stayed around a little bit longer in the story, because he plays a role of kind of like the older brother, like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. I know you're up to something. And she doesn't really come clean with him for so long. She kind of just drags him along into thinking that everything's okay, but he's not an idiot. He's a smart guy. And then I believe, doesn't he just end up just going back down the mountain?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
leaves her behind. I think you can look at him in a lot of different ways. You can look at him as just a decent guy who
Yeah.
was trying to do right by her and by what he saw as the sort of sacredness of Everest.
Right.
Because the I think I was saying it Dorge, or it's hard to pronounce because it's clearly a name that's local to Nepal, or it's a name that we don't have here, but or you don't see often. But I feel like he had this sense that Everest is to be respected, and he didn't feel she was respecting Everest, and that was an objection that he had. But I also felt like he was sort of symbolic or emblematic of a conscience which she was leaving behind as she ascended the mountain. It's like her conscience or left her, and so you actually had sort of physical evidence of that happening, because the closer she got to the top, the more she was willing to do to finish, no matter what it took.
She was breaking mentally and physically that whole entire time. Like,
Totally.
Even though she's ascending, she's descending, like, mentally. Like, you can tell she's going crazy. And leading up to that, even talking about descending into this like madness, how about that like scene where she comes to a point where she's basically snuck into camp, where she's kind of pulled the slip on the agents who are chasing her. Sure. And she sneaks into a base camp. I don't know if it was base camp 2 or 3, but she basically has to like snuggle up with that dead guy in that tent. Oh my God. That was a creep. That was just like, oh, dude, like, and she knew he was dead. Like, that was but she would talk to him, like, was the only person she could talk to. I mean, how did you feel like that was, like, for me, that was pretty pinnacle of like, oh shit, this is real. Like, I can only imagine being in that situation. You know what I'm saying? That's crazy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of loss of senses and sanity, as the atmosphere is very thin. I think that's also worth sort of touching on real quick, is to go back and talk about, I suppose, real quickly, like why how things unfold a little. Like, initially, the secret agency gets that hit like you described, where they find out that Mars's fingerprints have been found, so they know that they track it down to Haskell, right? But what happens at that point, I don't think we really talked about this, is the agents that were sent to deal with this problem force Haskell to help them get to the top of Everest to get
we didn't touch that at all.
To get the rest of it, to get the body. And Suzanne, wanting to save Haskell, follows and also climbs. They know of her and they're going after her, or they want to go after her, but they don't realize that at the beginning that she's actually going to make an attempt to follow them and to sort of save Haskell. Also, I think worth mentioning as we go forward, because we're going to be talking more and more about the effects and the difficulties of the ascent on Everest. For people who maybe are watching this but don't realize this, not only is it just a difficult climb because it's physically exhausting and the the atmosphere is quite thin, and there's not a lot of air, and also that there's physical dangers, avalanches. You could fall into a pit or a crevasse. There's lots
The
of things
abominable snowman. The abominable
Yeah,
snowman. Don't leave him out.
Absolutely, you
Yeah.
can't leave him out. There's a lot of danger associated with climbing Everest.
Yeah.
But what I think people don't realize, and they touch upon in this book, is that it's so physically destructive to the body, causing swelling in your lungs, swelling in your brain, that as people ascend, they often take different medications and drugs which help them get to the top in one piece and alive.
Right.
That prevent the lungs from becoming overflowing with fluids, that prevent the brain from swelling, to prevent you from failing to exhaustion. They take sometimes amphetamines. They take Viagra. They were saying the Viagra.
Yeah, that was crazy. That list of drugs was huge. Yeah.
Yeah, she takes this whole host of drugs. So just to show like how incredibly hard it is to get up there, like you need the guides, you need the experts, and that's why these secret agents absolutely require Haskell to get back to this body, because not only do they not know where it is specifically, they aren't trained to climb Everest.
They will die.
They're up against an almost inexorable force. And then, meanwhile, Suzanne and Haskell are basically in their element. And I thought that was important to the story, because it gave a little bit of credibility to the fact that they were able to get one up on the agents on many occasions, despite that they didn't have training, right?
Right, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were the only reason why those agents got up there. And even though these agents have their, handguns and are trained assassins, I mean, they aren't anything up there. They're nothing without those guys. So it does give a lot of credit to the Sherpas. I have never done any like backpacking or mountain climbing. Have you? I mean, I'm pretty hide in my man cave kind of guy. Sure. But it does give you kind of respect for those kind of people who do that. And capitalizing on that even more is, did you notice that Dorji, the character we were talking about, he's smoking cigarettes the whole time, and there's no oxygen up there. He's smoking cigarettes. He doesn't even care. He doesn't use oxygen at all. No. It's crazy to think about like what it would take to get up to Mount Everest. I think I recently saw like a little short video clip in IMAX to a movie, because sometimes they give you like those 15 or 20-minute movies before, and it was showing these guys ascending, and I mean, I couldn't imagine it. I couldn't. The mountain is a character, by all means, man. That Mount Everest in this book is almost a bigger character than anybody else in it. The way that they refer to her and they speak about the mountain, they reference the mountain as a female too. Yes. Right? They always call the mountain a her or she. They don't. It's crazy. A lot of the action sequences all have to do with the element. It's not like bang bang, shoot you up, melee combat, So the mountain itself plays a huge role in the book.
Yeah, I thought the avalanche scene was just fantastic.
Oh yeah, for sure. I wanted to talk a little bit about panels, because you had said the way that just talking on the story about how it read. Like looking through the panels, I found this hella easy to read, and I don't know why. I think the panels were laid out like perfectly.
They were. The dialogue.
Yeah. And personally, I was flipping through because I wanted to find my favorite page. My favorite piece of art is, I don't know which chapter this is. I think it's like the 7th. But there's a scene, and I don't know if you can see it. If you look closely, there's the tent. But if you look right above, there's a skull right there. You see the mountain. There's 2 eyes. 1, 2, a nose, and then the mouth.
Yeah.
That, I didn't notice that till I'd gotten to the back of the book, and they were showing like all the art. And when I went back and I started looking at the mountain, they add hella facial recognitions into the mountain. And then I was like, and that's when I was kind of like, holy crap, this mountain is a character in this book. This mountain is like probably the most important character in the whole book.
For certain.
It's just nutty when you think about it. And I didn't even notice that till I got to the end, until the artist Mustafa was like, hey, I drew in faces all over this. And you don't really notice it until the end. Anyway, I don't know. I just went on.
That's a great page. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that might have been an issue cover.
Yeah, I believe so.
I think so. Yeah, and they're great covers. He's his art is fantastic. Just to reflect a little bit on that, talking about earlier about consistency, and what I love is when I am reading a book and panel to panel, that character, you could pick them out of a police lineup,
Sure.
right down to every detail. Sometimes even really well illustrated books, you'll look at this odd panel and you'll be like, I know who that character's supposed to be, but that doesn't look like them, from the
Right.
side, from above,
Yeah.
maybe just a random one. It's just a little rough, or I find details like arm length of a character, hand shape of a character. All those
Sure.
things matter to me, because when I'm reading a book and someone's like, here, take a look at this picture, and they hold up a picture, and the
Right.
hand's not belonging to the character, and then you see them standing there and you can see their hand looks totally different.
Right.
Like say they're holding up the picture and they've got like little stubby fingers, and then they go back and they have these really long fingers, stuff like that. Their feet, their leg length. The artists that are able to keep it all consistent and really clean, I really appreciate that when I'm reading a book, because it's really immersive. Whenever you get those odd panels that just stand out in a book that make you go, who's that character? What is happening in this panel? It takes me right out of the story. So
Right.
all credit due to Mustafa. Not only was it artistically creative and really interesting, it was clean and technically really sound. And I'm surprised I haven't seen more from him. I feel like this is a guy we're going to see a lot from,
Hope
because
so.
he's really good. So all credit.
Absolutely. So talking about, were you happy with the conclusion of the story? And I don't mean to go there just yet, I guess, but I feel like we've kind of covered, the basic story of them basically getting up to the top. Were you happy with that conclusion? Did you? All right, let me just first off by saying, and I've already said this is a spoiler class, so I don't care. She lives. But damn, dude, I didn't think she was going to live, bro. I thought she was going down for sure. I thought, there was times in there when it started getting to end, especially after, that one scene like we talked about with her cuddling with the dead corpse. I was like, there is no way that this woman is going to survive this shit. And when she gets to the top, there is that, I don't want to hesitate to call it a fight scene, but that action sequence, I don't understood. I tried going back and reading as to what happened there. I guess she gets to the top, right? She gets to the top, and then she's able to pull a fast one on the agents by attaching something to an oxygen tank. Can you highlight that for me? Because I've tried to read that, and I'm like, what? How did she have a bomb on her? Is this some oxygen tank trick that I just don't know about?
That's what it is. That's what it is, and it's not because of any previous knowledge. It's just it was from a panel earlier in the book that you may at the time you probably absorbed it, but because it didn't necessarily seem relevant, you probably slipped your mind. Really, what it was Dorge, the Sherpa guide, her friend, warned her about keeping the valve perfectly clean on the oxygen tank.
Yes, I remember. Okay.
And he was saying because if it's not perfectly clean, it can ignite the oxygen.
Oh, I totally remember that now. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what it was. It was that she applied lip balm, like a petroleum product, some kind of a balm, to the oxygen. So when he screwed his valve in, it caused a spark of some kind, because I guess that atmosphere things work differently,
right?
And that's what generated the explosion, which killed the two agents. But I think my audio. Can you hear me well right now?
I can hear you perfectly, man. How about you?
Okay, I can see. I can read your lips right now, but I can't hear you.
Oh, really? Hold on one sec. How about now? Check.
Yeah, you cut out audio wise.
Check. Can you hear me now?
I think I'm okay. Maybe just reinitiate your headphones.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Nope.
Sorry, folks.
How about now?
No.
Nope. Hello? Can you hear me now? Nope. We may have lost Mark. Can you hear me? Nope. Hello?
I hear you now. Hold on, try me again.
Okay. Are we good?
My headphones that are the problem.
Oh, okay. Is your headset?
Yeah, my headset. For some reason, I think the button on it's being depressed by itself because
Oh.
it's screwing up with trying to initiate Siri on me.
Oh, it's all good. We're
Yeah,
having fun here. This is totally for fun. It doesn't even matter, dude.
yeah, sure,
That's
but
cool.
it's nice to keep it flowing. So I'll try him again because or can you hear me well without him?
No, yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Yeah,
Okay,
you're good.
I just don't want to cause any feedback or anything, but you got headphones on, so that should eliminate the problem.
Yeah.
You know, you know, looking toward the ending of the story, I think that's another area where the dual narrative shines well because, as we discover, Mars himself, this elite agent, dies at the top of Everest, and because
Right.
Suzanne's experience is kind of mirroring Mars's experience, going to the top of Everest looking for answers that may or may not really be there, answers within. I feel like the fact that that Mars died sort of makes you think, well, she's following the same path. She might die right beside him, you know?
Right. That's kind
But
of how I thought it was going to go down. I really did.
but she doesn't. But I think the story tells a more interesting, uh, kind of gives you a more interesting ending by talking about how instead, after this experience, this harrowing experience, and ascending Everest, and this life changing experience that she's supposed to be having, she didn't change at all, really. At
No.
the end, she's the same person. She's the same drug addict. You know,
Right.
at the end, she's still using drugs,
Yeah.
and she's still who she is. And I think that's. I don't know how much of a video game fan that you are. We haven't really talked a lot about that, but
Huge game fan.
have you played Journey?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That is a great game.
I don't want to put a huge spoiler on Journey either, although that's a few years old now too, and it's kind of a difficult game to spoil. But I think it reflects. I think it's worth bringing up with when talking about this story because I feel like with Journey, the message of Journey for me is that life is in the journey, and that's really the game
Yeah.
itself.
Oh, yeah.
That's the power of the game Journey is you get to the end and you realize if you rush to get there, that was
Right.
foolish because there was nothing. It was all in the journey itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the genius of that game, and that's worth talking about on its own. That game because I think it's pretty powerful. And I think that the journey here informs us about who Suzanne really is, and
Right.
how she ascended Everest is reflective on who she'll be when she gets to the top.
Yeah.
What led her to go up to there and how she got up there is who she's going to be ever after. And I think it's a reminder to the reader, and I think that's an interesting part of the story. It's a reminder to the reader to not look for your life in endings and think about it along the journey. You are who you are every day and how you treat people and what you do and the choices you make. You aren't who you think you're going to be at these big goalpost moments in life. They're
Right.
nice, but they don't inform you who you are. Who you are is how you act and how you treat people and all the little decisions you make all the time. So I thought that was kind of interesting because yeah, it wasn't this big victory. Oh, she made it to Everest. She's changed. She's different. She's better now. She's not. She's the same person she's been because that's who Suzanne is.
Were you okay with them not showing the descent? I was okay with that. Like at first I was like, because throughout the whole story, they're telling us the descent is so much, going down is so much harder than going up. And I'm thinking to myself, well, shit, if it was that hard getting up, she ain't getting down. Because at that point too, it's weird because she's left with no oxygen. She slides down that mountain and it doesn't really show how she makes it back.
Yeah.
We assume that she just toughed it out and she did it, but there's no, this is how she did it. This is how she made it back down, which I was okay with. I don't know. How did you feel about not showing the actual descent? Do you think it was needed?
Well, I think in order to show it in detail, it would have extended the length of the book unreasonably.
Yeah,
And
me too.
I don't think it would have served the narrative all that well. I think they could have shown it in like a transitionary panels. Like they could have shown scenes of her at the different camps, looking over a cliff ledge, discovering an oxygen tank in a snowbank or something like that. It could have been a
Right.
serious sort of a time passage montage, if you want. But I think that exists in the mind anyway. I think we know she got there. I think by that point, having survived all of the danger and difficulty that she had getting up to the top, I think it was easy to believe she'd make it back despite the dangers of returning. And it's kind of in phases. If she could find an oxygen tank on the on the mountain itself to get to the next base camp, every time you get to a camp, you have an opportunity to maybe find something or get help from somebody.
Right.
Which I assume that's what she did. She made it camp by camp, because it takes a few weeks to get back down too, right? I mean, that's something else I don't think we've talked about here. People think climbing Everest, they may think, oh, that's got to be hard. What does that take? 3-4 days? No,
it takes
2 months. It takes 2.5 months even to do up and down. Like, so if we assume that it took her 6 weeks or 5 or 6 weeks to get to the top, man, that's something I wanted to ask you about actually, though. If we're doing the spoiler cast here, we can talk about, as far as believability goes, I didn't have a problem with it because I thought it was sort of indicative of the madness and the difficulty of climbing. But I thought that the fact that these elite agents were constantly sort of seemingly unaware of her proximity, she'd be showing up at the camp that they had just showed up at, and they thought they'd gotten rid of her or something like that. And then, you'd think these elite agents would know their perimeter, they'd be aware of everything. And at certain points, they indicate that, like, they're like, you didn't think we knew you were here or something like that. But I do think there was periods of time where they were fooled. And I thought that was perhaps a stretch. But I didn't mind it because I think, and I may be giving them too much credit, but I do think that, there was that unspoken idea that they're low oxygen, right? They're breaking down. The higher they go, the crazier you get, basically.
Sure, you're not getting the nutrients you need and such.
Right.
So, yeah.
And they're so tired. So I think they were making tons of mistakes by the time they got to the top. Whereas Haskell and Suzanne had a major advantage once you get close to the top because they have so much more experience climbing. So they were able to keep their wits about them. But even them, I mean, they barely were able to keep their wits about them.
Yeah, I think for the sake of there had to be some sort of drama played out. But yeah, that was the only part where I was, I had a little believability issue there. I wouldn't even think, unless those secret agents were trained, I don't care if you're, Bruce Lee, if you're not acclimated to that like elevation, you're just not going to make it.
No.
And so if anything, I did kind of find it hard to believe a couple times those agents would have made it as far as they did. But I mean, without them there, all we would have had would have been the mountain, which I think actually would have been okay too, as long as they made it even more dramatic, like for Suzanne as far as injury or something. But I was okay with it when they got to the very top. I was okay with it. It wasn't so far-fetched, Yeah, I was okay with it. It was good.
Yeah, I thought it was fine too. I could see somebody reading that and those elements, both those sides of that coin. One, how could they slip up so often being elite agents? But then the other element was, like you say, how could they make it up to Everest without training? They barely do. As they ascend to the top, many of them die from exposure, or they get killed in some kind of showdown confrontation. The avalanche killed off a few of the agents. There was, I think one of them got shot. A bunch of them die throughout the trip to the top. So it's not as though they started with 8 agents and then at the end they're all at the top. They made it, no problem, no training. They are trained physically, not for Everest, but they are kind of elite agents who are at least in shape and have good physical condition. They're not altitude trained. But that's part of what they, when they stop at those camps, a lot of the reason why is to acclimate themselves to
lungs,
altitude. So at least there's that believability where they were able to acclimate. It's not like they ran up the mountain in 2 days. It takes place over a long period of time. And I think that's part of why the book does have what some people consider slow pacing. It kind of has to if it's responsible to the task at hand. I think if it had been a story about a 6-week climb to the summit of Everest and it went by any quicker than it did, it would have felt false.
It would have been rushed. I agree. 100%. You can't tell a story like that and like just be like, oh, and then they ran up the mountain, because that's not how it works. You know, you're going to be inching your way up and fighting for every step. Like she even says it as she's going up. She says every step feels like that you've like ran a mile. Like every step is like impossible to take. Like it's no easy task. I wanted to ask you a question. I'm glad that this book is self-contained. I think it was just enough. But let's just say, for the sake of it, if they made another one, not like necessarily High Crimes Part 2 or like a continuation, could you possibly see it continuing on? I personally couldn't. I think I love this book, and sometimes, you know, it depending on how good a book sells is they'll keep on trying to press it forward. I wouldn't want to see another, even though I love this book as much as I did, I wouldn't want to see another one. I like it just the way it is.
You know, I agree with you. I think this, I'm going to relate to this to video games again, because I think this does, I hope you don't mind, because it's for me, it's a passion of mine as well. I
Sure.
feel like this is like the discussion about The Last of Us and whether or not there should be a sequel to The Last of Us. Have you played?
I played it a lot, yes. I am totally on The Last of Us. I played it on the PlayStation 3. I didn't play it on the PS4 remastered because I actually didn't want to play it again for a second time, because that story was so effective towards me. Like that, I don't want to spoil The Last of Us because that game is still somewhat new.
I agree with you.
But you know the opening scene. You know which one I'm talking about,
Absolutely.
right? Like that opening scene like was one of the only scenes that I've almost got. I don't have any children, but I got choked up. I was like, oh shit, that is terrible. You know, like, and if I was gonna, I didn't want to replay it because I didn't think it would have the same kind of emotional impact the second time around. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm in camp. Don't do that again. I don't want a second one.
I get it. I played it again because I loved it so much, and I felt that it strained a little bit technically on the PS3. It's an amazing accomplishment, but I felt like I wanted to see it in its glory, and the remaster gives you that. It won't have the same emotional impact either through the beginning or toward the end.
Right.
Without spoiling anything, though, I guess just referring lightly to The Last of Us without getting too deep into the plot, there are a lot of people who feel like, let's leave that story alone.
Yeah.
But because it was such a big selling game,
Naughty Dog's gonna make it. Yeah.
They and Sony's gonna be begging them. They're gonna be pushing for that sequel. But I think it's possible to make the sequel, but to not make it Lethal Weapon 2 style. You know, just more of the same with the same people. I think with The Last of Us, you have to give it an artistically pleasing sequel. And I think that's what High Crimes, if you're going to revisit Suzanne, I say you revisit her when she's Haskell's age.
Oh, man.
So,
I didn't even think about that.
That gets her
for sure.
Because then you can look back on her life as more of a what did happen to her, that we could learn about that through her actions and her memories. But also she could be now the mentor, if you will, to that next young person. Because as Haskell was to her, as Mars in his own weird way was to her. Or, for example, the story could be about somebody altogether different. We may never see Suzanne, but they're reading her diaries.
I could totally see that. Yeah, that would totally make sense.
So it's got to be a clever sequel, but it could be done. I don't think it's necessary. I love these one-offs too. You know, Image Comics does some pretty good one-offs. Sometimes it's the sign of a failed series, but sometimes it's a mini series. You know, sometimes they want to put out 10, 12 issues, really good, solid issues, and that's the story. And then we get these nice, gorgeous hardcovers. Like this is a Dark Horse. Dark Horse is killing it with these hardcovers, man. They're beautiful. They're nice to read. The print is great, and the stories are a blast. You know, I guess what I want to touch on, I haven't done the research, but I am kind of wondering, have we looked at Chris Sabella's bibliography at all? Is there anything else that he's been
I haven't. I don't know. You're on the Kind of Funny comic book group, which if you're not on, you should join. My backlog is so large. Like it's so big. And in fact, the only reason why I read this was to just get into the book club so I can talk to more like-minded people about comic books. But I mean, I am sitting to my right and staring at like literally 400 books that aren't boarded bagged or organized. In fact, like that shit behind me, half of those drawers are empty because I'm trying to organize stuff today. I'm so backed up that I don't. I'm finding myself less and less going out for specific books. I just buy bunches of books and then I find the diamonds in the rough. The only time I'm going out hunting for specific books is now for this book club that I belong to, and then also the Kind of Funny comic group book club. Like I just read Batman: The Long Halloween. That's that book of the month for that group. So unless it's like for a book club, I'm not going out specifically for independent books anymore because I probably will never be able to read all the books I have. But I'd be interesting. Like if I was just flipping through and I was like, oh, Christopher Sabella, I'd be like, oh shit, I'm reading that right now. Like without question, because the dialogue, the story, like he's proven to me, obviously in this book, that he can deliver. So I'd be willing to read. He's obviously a talented individual, and I can't read him.
He's on the radar for me for sure. You know, it's kind of like for me, one of the majors is David Lapham. I read Stray Bullets. Have you read Stray Bullets?
I have not. No.
Oh my god! Like I'll tell you this right now, Garrett. You gotta almost drop everything. You gotta
read that.
I'm serious though.
All right, I'm marking it on the phone. Stray Bullets.
Stray Bullets. Get the Uber Ellis edition from Amazon. It's less than $40, man. It's 1,300 pages.
I'm adding it to my wish list.
And hold on, while you're at it, add Volume 6, The Killers. Okay, because that comes after Uber Ellis. I guarantee you.
There it is.
I can guarantee you this, Garrett. After you've read this 1,300 pages volume, you will immediately want to read the Volume 6.
Yeah, then.
Yeah, it's this thick, man. I can pull it off the shelf for you. Nah, it's kind of buried. But I will say.
He said, "No, it's buried."
Well, it's kind of buried. Well, I'm gonna probably reread it. Maybe I'm not reading issues on the latest run because I really do love to read it collected. David Lapham stuff, you will lose your mind waiting on a cliffhanger because things happen and you're like, what? I will tell you something right now. I can almost guarantee you this, especially because of how much you love Thai crimes.
Yeah.
This book will become one of your favorite books you've ever read.
What?
And I'll put this out there too. You're probably going to be like mind blown on David Lapham because I'll tell you this, Stray Bullets is so important to comics, to movies, to popular culture in ways that you're going to be like, wait a second, who else has read this book? Because the way he tells stories, the way the characters are formed and the plots kind of flow, you're going to be like, I recognize this stuff. Like he's been an inspiration behind
for other mediums. Yeah, okay, I get it.
And I'm telling you, these stories, it's the kind of thing he takes you on a ride. Things happen. I know this is a little bit aside from our. I don't mind though, because I hope you don't mind. I always want to promote Stray Bullets because it's one of the best experiences you'll ever have reading comics.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. So I'm totally gonna check it out. I just added it to my wish list. I got a birthday coming up, and that's what I always give the wife. I am always like, she never knows what to get me, or my mom. So I'm always like, well, my Amazon wish list is public. So let's talk about before we go. I'm interested. What are you reading right now?
Right now, I just started Southern Bastards Volume 1.
Cool.
Jason Aaron. So far, so good. I just started it. I'm reading it for a book club, actually, at a local comic shop.
Nice.
I was going to read it anyway. I have Volume 1 and 2 kind of waiting in the wings, just in general, if you want to say on the backlog. But the local shop is doing it for their book club next week. So I'm like, okay, it's jumping ahead of the line. And I'm gonna get that read and be ready to discuss it. So far, so good. I mean, if you've read any Aaron, he's done a bunch of different runs, but he also did Scalped.
Okay.
Which I like his stuff, and he's the kind of writer that once I get into it, I'm like, okay, I'm enjoying this, but it's not the type of thing that clicks with me like instantly, it sort of like takes a little while for me to warm up to any of his stories or, but I'm enjoying it. I'd say so far it's a recommend, but I have to, next time we chat, I'll let you know if I would say like, yeah, run out and buy it,
Awesome. Yeah. Well, so what I'm going to just start reading, I'm going to go ahead and start reading Witches. It's actually one of the newer book.
I read that like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. So I haven't, and everybody keeps on telling me to read Witches. Everybody's like, Witches, Witches. If you love horror movies, you're going to love this. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get it. And I got suckered into buying it. So, and I'm kind of been on a weird sci-fi horror kick. Like, don't laugh at me, but I just read Batman versus Predator. And it was so cheesy, but cheesy in a good way. Like those B action movies that you're like, this story doesn't matter, but whatever. It's hilariously funny. Anyway, so I'm on a horror movie kick right now, so I think I'm going to read Witches. But any final thoughts on High Crimes before we?
Well, just I'll reflect real briefly on Witches, just because I did read it recently. I enjoyed it, and I think you're going to enjoy it.
Cool.
I'd have fun talking with you a little bit about it when you're done.
Sure.
But I will say about horror books, because you're saying you're kind of on a horror kick. One of the things I love about horror books is this concept of palate cleansers when you're reading. And I was at a comic shop. My wife was with me yesterday, and I was talking with the guys, and we kept on talking about palate cleansers. And afterwards, she was like, "What the hell are you talking about? Palate cleansers?" Yeah. and I was saying, well, you know that when you read a certain type of book, sometimes if you read a book that's quite different, it kind of refreshes you, and it lets you go back to a genre. And like if you read like a Western book, if you read another Western book afterward, you're going to have that fatigue. But if you switch it up and read something horror or action, some sort of like hero book or whatever, it cleanses the palate, right?
Absolutely.
I find horror books are amazing palate cleansers. You mix it up, it's exciting, it's different, and then you return to something sort of more sedate, less, horror books tend to be fantasy and a little bit off the wall. I love them for that, though. I love that. Whenever I find a really good horror book, I'm like, I got to get this because I know I'm going to have that time where I want to like mix things up. As for final thoughts on High Crimes, I recommend it wholeheartedly. I think something we haven't, you kind of brought, I have my volume of it here.
Yeah.
You kind of brought it into the frame a few times. I think this is kind of worth pointing out. It's got nice binding. It's a really nice hardcover with the illustrations actually merged to the book itself. There's different texture on these graphics here, and
I love that.
These are small things, but as far as like your collection goes, this is a great book to have in your collection, and it's the sort of story you're going to want to come back and reread eventually if you find the time. I know you're talking about backlog, I get that, but this is the kind of book I can see one day going like, yeah, you know what, I want to take that ride again and experience that story again. And this really nice package with it's got nice paper. It's a decent thickness. It's got a lot of good physical properties to go along with the story, which I think is a selling point, for a book. So I recommend it. I think it's worth going into it, understanding that it can be a little cerebral at times, but that to me that's a compliment. It's a thinker here and there. For not only from an intellectual perspective, but I think, and through the symbology and that sort of stuff, but I think morally, there's a lot of times where you're thinking, do I agree with anybody? Do I trust any of these characters' perspectives? Do I respect these characters? You're going to be asking yourself that question a lot reading sometimes. And I think that it's got that kind of challenge to it. There isn't a good and evil. There isn't like, well, these are the good people and these are the bad people. Most of the good people get the hell out of the way because they know this stinks to high heaven, right?
Right.
Like George A., that character, he wants out of this because he knows this is terrible.
Yeah.
The bad people tend to stay, and that might even include Suzanne, the protagonist. So if you've heard all of our, spoiler notes here, I still think it's probably worth reading, although some things will be obvious because you've heard this.
Yeah, me too.
If you've heard all this and you still are willing to take a try with High Crimes, I say pick it up. And it's not expensive. I found it was pretty well priced through Amazon.
So I don't know, have you ever decided like on like a grading scale? Like I'm a big believer in the 5-star system. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like yeah. I go like 1 star, I hated it. 2 star, I didn't like it. 3 star, I liked it. 4 stars, I really liked it. And 5 star, I loved it. I've already told this. You already know my score. I gave it a 5. I thought I loved this book. For whatever reason, I think I needed a palate cleanser going back to that because I was reading nothing but, superheroes and capes for like a good 6 months. And I was just on these runs. I was on a Batman run. I was on a Spider-Man run. I was on an Avengers run. And I was just like, oh, shit, I need something different. And as soon as I picked up this book, it was like completely like, oh, man, real people, real world situation. I'm like, this is exactly what I needed. So maybe that had something to do with it. But I can tell you what, I don't give out 1 stars very often, or 5, because I mean, hate is a powerful word and love is a powerful word. So I'm going to be honest with you right now. I give it a 5 stars. Where are you at? You know, you don't
interesting.
have,
I'll play along. I'll play along. I think ratings can be difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll work within the 5-star system, and I'll explain how I see ratings just real briefly.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Because I think it provides context.
Right.
I think ratings can be a difficult thing because and this, I'll bring this back to video games a little bit, because I find that a lot of times video game ratings get confusing. You know, someone rates a game 10 out of 10.
Right.
Okay,
right.
that's 10 point scale.
Yeah.
5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, whatever. They rate it 10 out of 10, and then people will flood the comments. It wasn't perfect. This was wrong with it. This was wrong with it. This was wrong with it. And the reviewer, if they respond at all, will be like, "That's true, but I still think it's a 10." Well, why is that? And how I feel about ratings and why that is because you're not rating something on a level of perfection.
No.
A rating really is a degree to which you recommend a book.
Oh yeah.
Or a game. You know,
Yeah.
if you say a game's a 10, that's because you're saying play this game. You're not saying it's perfect. You're saying you gotta play it, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I think when I rate High Crimes, I'm gonna rate it on how highly I would recommend it for your average person to pick up.
Sure.
I'm gonna probably say it's a 4 as a degree of recommend, a 4 on 5.
That's a respectable score, dude. That's a really respectable score.
Sure, it's a respectable score. I think it's worth picking up. I think most people will enjoy it. The reason why I put it at a 4 is I do think it has a little bit of an intellectual quality that some people might be thinking it's slightly dull. But I personally didn't see that at all. How much did I enjoy High Crimes? I enjoyed it. It was like a 5 for me because I didn't feel like reading anything else when I was reading it. I wasn't trying to rush through it to get to another book that's on the shelf.
Right.
I thought about it when I wasn't reading it, and I thought about it since I've read it. And for me, all those are the qualities of on a personal level, I kind of agree with you. It's basically a 5. It's like a high 4 or it's a 5. But how much do I think, if you're watching this and you're still wondering, should I pick up High Crimes? I'd say a 4 to 5, which in and of itself is a great score. I don't think you can really go wrong with the book. So yeah, I'd say 4.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to plug? Like your Twitter account, PlayStation Network name, anything like that?
Right now, I'm sort of in between plugging things, I suppose. So for today, I think I'll just leave it there. But you know, I do recommend people check out the Kind of Funny Comics group on Facebook, because we do talk about comics we're reading, books we recommend one another. I think that's been fun. It's getting me back into talking about stuff. Same with the local book clubs, and that's something I recommend to people as well. If you're watching this and you you'd like to talk about comics, some of your local comic shops probably have a book club, and that's fun, man. You know, talk about books, get recommendations from people, find people with similar interests that you can share recommendations with and discuss things. So I guess my plugs would be there, like, you know, get into the forums, talk about these books, and yeah.
Absolutely. Like Mark said, I'm going to echo him. Join the Kind of Funny Comics Facebook group. We're on there all the time, chatting it up, posting pictures, posting videos. We're all like-minded. We're all comic book lovers, enthusiasts, and there's no reason not to check us out. If you want to leave, you can always leave. If you want to come by, you can always check it out and then bounce if you're not happy.
Sure. And I'll just put like a little a punctuation mark on that endorsement from both of us. I'm going to say this right now. It's not a huge group at the moment. It's gaining momentum. But here's the thing about the Kind of Funny Comics group. Right now, today, there's not a jerk in that group. Like, this is the nicest group of people. Everybody's super enthusiastic. They have great recommendations. The discussions are always positives. You know, you don't have that thing where you're having this good discussion and someone hops on and starts saying stuff that's like negative and criticizing people. So if you want a place where you can go and talk about comics and everybody's like really into comics and really positive, I can't speak highly enough about the group. Really nice people.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. That was Quickfire Comic Top, Episode 5, the High Crime SpoilerCast. Mark, thank you so much. We're going to get together soon and do this again. I hope. I had a wonderful time talking to you, brother. This is great. I think we need to do this on a regular basis.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me on, man.
All right. You guys all have a great day. Peace out.